The arrogant alien laughed at the pathetic human's jalopy ship, until the human's fist crashed into his jaw like a meteor, striking a planet, shattering teeth. "So dumb humans, your technology is junk. Worthless like you." Xander cackled scornfully, his purple scales shimmering in the spaceport lights as he shoved his hover dolly into the rusty bucket's hull, denting the rusted metal. Jesse couldn't let that happen, but Xander and his crew were in the way, and they had no idea how high the stakes really were. How much was really riding on this pathetic little human ship? Jesse faked a dumb smile, playing the bumbling human routine he'd perfected over years of these shutty little alien port shakedowns. But behind the smile, his tactical mind raced through dozens of plans. He needed to get the Vorkarians out of the way, no matter what. Or the hidden human colonies on Xanthus Prime were doomed, and if the Vorkarians found those colonies, they were doomed twice over. This mission could not fail. Jesse worked fast to unload the seemingly innocuous medical supplies from his ship's cargo hold, his fingers trembling slightly as he felt Xander's suspicious gaze boring into his back. The Vorkarian dock workers had not left, as Jesse had hoped, instead lingering to watch him with narrowed reptilian eyes. Jesse knew he had to be extra careful not to give any hint of the true nature of his cargo. Nestled amongst the basic antibiotics and bandages were several unmarked crates containing advanced human weaponry and power armor, intended to even the odds for the beleaguered human colonists in their fight against the increasingly aggressive Vorkarians. Their furtive movement caught Jesse's eye. His contact, a scruffy human named Mick, approached the rusty bucket with a nervous glance at the looming Vorkarians. As they transferred the crates with covert efficiency, Mick leaned in close to Jesse, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's worse than we thought, Jess. The scalebacks, they've been taking our people. Experiments, torture, trying to figure out what makes us tick. It's like they're obsessed with cracking the code of human grit." Mick's haunted eyes pleaded with Jesse. "You gotta tell Earth, man. We need help." Jesse set his jaw. "I'm not here to play messenger, Mick. I'm here to give our people a fighting chance. These supplies will—" Well, what have we here?" Xander's mocking voice rang out as he strode towards them, his cronies in tow. "Inspecting your cargo won't be a problem, will it, human?" Mick stepped forward, his hands raised in supplication. "Now hold on, there's no need for—" As the Vorkarians began ripping open the crates, Jesse thought fast. Lunging forward, he deliberately toppled a large crate marked ammunition, sending its contents spilling across the dock in a cacophonous clatter. While Xander and the others were momentarily distracted by the ammo, Jesse hauled Mick to his feet, hissing in his ear, "Make a distraction now!" Mick nodded painfully, then staggered towards the nearest Vorkarian. With a defiant roar, he swung his fist at the alien's scaly jaw, inciting an instant brawl as the other dock workers leapt to their comrade's defense. Using the chaos as cover, Jesse frantically worked to conceal the true prize, the weapons and power armor, behind a cunningly disguised false bulkhead in his ship's cargo bay. His heart raced as he shoved the crates into the hidden compartment. If the Vorkarians discovered his real mission, it would all be over for him, Mick, and every human on Xanthus Prime. As the brawl raged on the docks, Jesse felt rough hands seize him from behind. Xanthus Prime security forces, clad in black armor emblazoned with the Vorkarian crest, dragged him away from the chaos. He struggled against their iron grip, but a swift blow to the head left him dazed. Jesse came to in a dingy cell, head throbbing. A flickering light illuminated the cramped space, revealing damp walls covered in alien graffiti. The cell door clanged open, and a hulking Vorkarian strode in, his scales marred by jagged scars. "I am Kragnar, Chief of Security." His voice was a guttural rasp. "And you, human, are no mere cargo hauler." Jesse met Kragnar's predatory gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just here to deliver medical supplies." Kragnar's lips curled in a sneer. "We shall see." Two guards entered, pinning Jesse to the wall. Kragnar produced a sinister-looking device, all gleaming metal and pulsing lights. He pressed it to Jesse's temple, and pain exploded through his skull. It felt like 1,000 needles boring into his brain, probing, searching. Jesse gritted his teeth, drawing on his terror agency training to erect mental barriers, feeding the device false memories of a simple life as a freight pilot. After what seemed an eternity, Kragnar wrenched the device away, frustration etched on his reptilian features. "You resist well for a human, but I will break you." The guards hurled Jesse to the filthy floor. Kragnar's booted foot crashed into his ribs once, twice, 3 times. Jesse curled inward, absorbing the blows. "Jesse, come in." The voice was distorted but familiar. Zoe, his mission handler. "I know. Your capture has forced our hand. The Vorkarian experiments on humans, we can't let them continue." "The weapons," Jesse began. "Were just the start," Zoe cut in. "There's a resistance here, Jesse. Humans ready to fight, but they need those weapons, and they need you." Jesse struggled to sit up, his head swimming. "What do you need me to do?" "Break out. Link up with the resistance. We're moving up the timetable for the strike on the Vorkarian research facilities. If they unlock the secrets in human DNA that they're after, it's all over." Zoe's voice was grave. "For the colonists, for Earth, for all of us." "Understood," Jesse said, steel in his voice. The fate of his species hung in the balance. "Good luck," Zoe said before the calm went silent. Jesse hauled himself to his feet, ignoring the screaming protests of his injuries. He began to study his cell intently, searching for any weakness, any exploitable flaw. All the while, Kragnar's words echoed in his mind. The interrogations would continue. The Vorkarian was determined to break him. But Jesse was determined too, determined to endure, determined to escape, determined to complete his mission no matter the cost. The resistance needed those weapons, humanity needed him, and he would not fail them. Days bled into each other as Jesse endured Kragnar's relentless interrogations. The Vorkarian security chief subjected him to mind probes, beatings, and sleep deprivation, but Jesse's terror training held firm. He fed the mind probe false memories, withstood the physical abuse, and stayed alert for any opportunity to escape. That chance finally came during a transfer to a different cell block. As a guard roughly shoved him down a corridor, Jesse stumbled, his shoulder slamming into the Vorkarian. His fingers deftly slipped into the guard's pocket, plucking out a key card. The guard snarled and struck Jesse across the face, but the human merely smiled through bloody teeth. "Sorry, lost my balance." Seizing his moment, Jesse drove his elbow into the guard's throat, crushing his windpipe. As the Vorkarian choked and gasped, Jesse swiped his legs out from under him and slammed his head into the floor, knocking him out cold. Swiping the keycard, Jesse slipped into a maintenance corridor, his heart pounding. He navigated the twisting passageways, ducking security cameras and avoiding patrols, his intimate knowledge of spaceship layouts guiding him. He reached a communications hub and, after a tense moment picking the lock, darted inside. Pulling out a hidden Terra Tech hacking device, Jesse patched into the station's systems, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He scoured prisoner manifests and cell assignments, until he found what he was looking for. Mick, scheduled for transfer to a Vorkarian black site for enhanced interrogation. Jesse's blood ran cold. He knew what that meant. He couldn't leave Mick behind, but the human was held in a high-security wing, heavily guarded. Jesse needed a distraction, something to throw the station into chaos. His fingers danced across the keyboard as he hacked deeper into the station's security network. With a few keystrokes, he triggered a false reactor breach alarm. Klaxons blared and warning lights flashed as the station's computer announced an imminent core meltdown. Jesse grinned as he watched security feeds of Vorkarians frantically running to emergency stations, confusion and panic on their scaly faces. Slipping out of the comm hub, he sprinted down corridors, using the key card to bypass locked doors. He reached the high-security wing and found it in disarray, guards torn between watching their prisoners and responding to the reactor crisis. Spotting Mick's cell, Jesse swiped the stolen key card. The door clicked open. "No time," Jesse cut him off, tossing Mick a stolen pulse pistol. We're getting out of here. They fought their way through the station, Vorkarian energy bolts sizzling past as they took cover behind bulkheads. Jesse dropped 2 guards with well-placed shots, while Mick proved handy with a pulse rifle snatched from a fallen foe. They reached the hangar bay, only to find Xander and his goons waiting, weapons aimed at the Rusty Bucket's ramp. Jesse and Mick dove behind cargo crates as a barrage of energy fire erupted. Pulse bolts stitched the crates, the acrid scent of ozone filling the air. "Cover me!" Jesse yelled to Mick, who nodded and laid down suppressing fire. Jesse burst from cover, zigzagging across the hangar as shots zipped past. He closed the distance to Xander, dodging and weaving. Xander roared and leveled his rifle, but Jesse was faster. He launched into a slide, knocking Xander's legs from under him. The two tumbled to the ground, grappling for Xander's gun. The rifle skittered away as they exchanged brutal blows, Xander's claws raking Jesse's face. But Jesse's agility and combat training held the edge. He trapped Xander's arm and wrenched, snapping bone. The Vorkarian howled in pain. Jesse drove his knee into Xander's throat, and with a savage twist, snapped his neck with a sickening crunch. Rolling to his feet, Jesse snatched up Xander's rifle and sprinted for the Rusty Bucket, Mick covering his retreat. They pounded up the ramp, and Jesse lunged for the cockpit. He gunned the engines and wrenched back on the stick, sending the ship hurtling out of the hangar. Energy bolts spanged off the hull as the hangar doors began to grind shut. Jesse gritted his teeth and pushed the throttle to the firewall. The Rusty Bucket shot through the narrowing gap with mere meters to spare, the edges of the doors scraping paint from the hull. As they rocketed away from Xanthus Prime, the battered freighter shuddering around them, Jesse felt no elation, only grim resolve. They had escaped, but the real fight was just beginning. Humanity needed him, the Resistance needed him, and come hell or high water, Jesse would find them and lead the charge against the Vorkarian threat. The Rusty Bucket pierced through the void, engines thrumming as Jesse input the coordinates Zoe had provided. Mick leaned over the co-pilot's chair, squinting at the nav screen. "Looks like we're heading to the ass end of nowhere. You sure about this, Jess?" Jesse nodded grimly. "Zoe's intel is solid. If the Resistance is anywhere, it's there." As the battered freighter approached the small pockmarked moon, Mick tapped the screen. "There, nestled in those ruins. Clever buggers hiding right under the scaleback's snouts." Jesse brought the ship down on the outskirts of the ancient structures, dust billowing as the landing gear touched the rocky surface. No sooner had they lowered the ramp than a dozen heavily armed figures emerged from the ruins, weapons trained on the ship. A grizzled man with a laser burn scar across his weathered face stepped forward, his rifle never wavering. "That's far enough. Hands where I can see 'em." Jesse and Mick complied, slowly descending the ramp. "I'm Jesse Walker. This is Mick Stanton. We're here to help." The scarred man snorted. "Help? Last I checked, help didn't come with a rusted bucket like that. Hawkins is the name, and you'll forgive me if I don't take you at your word." At Hawkins's signal, the Resistance fighters surged forward, roughly patting down Jesse and Mick, relieving them of their weapons. They were marched into the ruins, past crumbling walls and toppled columns, until they reached what appeared to be a command center tucked deep underground. There they were subjected to a battery of scans, injections, and interrogations. Hawkins grilled them relentlessly, his hard eyes searching for any hint of deception. Hours passed before he finally leaned back, seemingly satisfied. "All right, you check out, but if you're here to help, you'd best have more than just good intentions." Jesse grinned. "Oh, we've got more than that. Mick, tell them what we're packing." Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "And I'm supposed to believe a Terra agent just waltzed in here with a truckload of military hardware?" As if on cue, a console beeped. Hawkins strode over, tapping the screen. Zoe's face shimmered into view, her voice crackling over the speakers. "Agent Hawkins, this is Zoe Castillo, Terra Mission Control, confirming Agent Walker's identity and mission parameters. The package is genuine." Hawkins' eyes widened, and a murmur of excitement rippled through the gathered Resistance fighters. He turned to Jesse, a glimmer of respect in his gaze. Well, I'll be damned. All right, Agent Walker, let's see what you've brought to the party. With the help of the Resistance, Jesse and Mick began unloading the hidden compartments of the rusty bucket. Crate after crate was hauled into the base, each one filled with gleaming human weaponry and armor. The fighters crowded around, marveling at the advanced technology. Jesse wasted no time. Immediately launching into a crash course on the weapons' use and tactics, he drilled the Resistance hard, honing their skills, molding them into a cohesive fighting force. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice one fighter in particular, a fierce young woman named Arya. She was always first in line for training, pushing herself harder than anyone, and when she thought Jesse wasn't looking, he could feel her eyes on him, studying him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Late one night, as Jesse pored over maps of the Vorkarian facilities, Arya approached him. "You're really giving them hope, you know," she said softly. "For the first time, they believe we can win." Jesse looked up, meeting her gaze. In her eyes he saw the same fire that burned in his own, the unwavering determination to fight for humanity, no matter the cost. He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. "We'll win," he said, his voice hardened with resolve. "We have to. Failure isn't an option, not with what's at stake." As the Resistance prepared for their most daring strike yet, Jesse couldn't shake the feeling that everything was riding on this. The fate of the colonies, of Earth itself, hung in the balance. But with the new weapons and his terror training, he'd make damn sure the scales tipped in humanity's favor. He glanced at Arya, saw the trust and fierce determination in her eyes, and felt a flicker of something else, something he'd long thought extinguished, but he pushed it aside. There would be time for that later, if they survived. For now there was only the mission, and come hell or high water Jesse would see it through. In the makeshift command center deep within the Resistance base, Jesse and Hawkins huddled over a holographic display of the Vorkarian research facility. They studied guard rotations, security systems, and potential entry points, their faces etched with concentration. "The main lab complex is heavily fortified," Hawkins growled, jabbing a finger at the glowing schematic. "But if we can get you inside, posing as a test subject, you might be able to gather intel and sabotage their work." "I'm going with you," a voice cut in. Jesse turned to see Arya standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and her jaw set with determination. "Arya, no, it's too dangerous," Jesse protested, even as a part of him thrilled at the thought of her by his side. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "I know that facility inside and out, its layout, its security systems. You need me." Jesse opened his mouth to argue, but Hawkins cut him off. "She's right. Her knowledge could be invaluable." Jesse sighed, recognizing the tactical advantage Arya's presence would provide. "All right, but we train hard. We go in prepared." Over the next few days, Jesse and Arya pushed themselves to the limit, honing their combat skills and practicing working as a seamless unit. They sparred hand to hand, their bodies moving in perfect sync as they traded blows and blocks. They ran obstacle courses, leaping and rolling in unison, anticipating each other's every move. As they trained, the air between them crackled with a growing tension, a spark that had been kindling since their first meeting. Lingering glances, accidental brushes of skin on skin, the heat of exertion mingling with the heat of attraction. But they stayed focused, never letting their budding feelings interfere with their preparations. The stakes were too high, the mission too crucial. On the eve of the operation, as the base hummed with nervous energy, Jesse found Arya in a quiet corner, checking and rechecking her gear. He sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "I'm ready for anything as long as you're with me." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the rest of the world falling away. Then, as if pulled by a force stronger than gravity, they came together. Their lips met in a kiss that was at once tender and fierce, a promise and a declaration. They poured all their pent-up longing, all their fear and hope into that one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, their hearts racing in sync. They rested their foreheads together, savoring the connection. "No matter what happens tomorrow," Jesse whispered, "I'm glad I met you." Arya smiled, a soft, private smile just for him. "Likewise, Agent Walker. Now let's go kick some Vorkarian ass." The next day, Jesse and Arya put their plan into action. They allowed themselves to be spotted by a Vorkarian patrol, then put up just enough of a fight to make their capture seem believable. As they were dragged into the research facility, they exchanged a covert glance, a tiny nod of readiness. Inside, they were subjected to a barrage of scans and tests, poked and prodded by Vorkarian scientists, who marveled at their human physiology. Jesse gritted his teeth as needles pierced his skin, as cold metal pressed against his temples. Beside him, Arya endured the same, her face a mask of stoic defiance. But even as they played the part of helpless captives, they were working. Through cleverly coded blinks and taps, they communicated their observations, building a mental map of the facility's layout and security measures. When they were finally left alone in a holding cell, Jesse reached into a hidden compartment in his boot, retrieving a tiny Terra Tech hacking device. With a few deft keystrokes, he patched into the facility's data network, his eyes scanning rapidly over the scrolling information. "I'm in," he whispered to Arya, who stood guard at the cell door. "Downloading their research data now." Arya watched in tense silence as Jesse worked, the minutes ticking by with agonizing slowness. Just as the download completed, a shrill alarm pierced the air. "Shit," Jesse hissed, yanking the hacking device free. "We've been made." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the cell door burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armed Vorkarian guards. Jesse and Arya moved as one, lunging forward in a blur of speed and precision. Jesse took the first guard down with a lightning-fast strike to the throat, crushing his windpipe. Arya dropped into a sweeping kick, knocking the legs out from under the second guard and following up with a brutal elbow to the temple. They snatched up the fallen guard's weapons and charged out into the corridor, pulse fire erupting around them. Jesse felt the crackle of energy bolts sizzling past his head as he returned fire, his aim steady and true. Beside him, Arya was a whirlwind of motion, her lithe form twisting and leaping as she rained down destruction on their enemies. They fought their way through the facility, leaving a trail of shattered Vorkarian bodies in their wake. As they burst out of the main entrance, the cool night air hitting their faces, they were greeted by a sight that made Jesse's heart soar. The resistance fighters, led by Hawkins and Mick, were storming the compound, their weapons spitting blue-white fire as they clashed with the Vorkarian defenders. Jesse and Arya sprinted towards their comrades, diving into the fray with reckless abandon. The battle raged around them, a symphony of chaos and courage, of desperation and defiance. Amidst the swirling chaos of the battle, Jesse and Arya fought their way through the Vorkarian defenses, pulse rifles spitting blue-white fire as they pushed towards the facility's central control room. They moved as one, covering each other's advances, their training and growing bond guiding their steps. As they breached the control room, Jesse's heart stopped. The room was a hive of activity, with Vorkarian scientists frantically working at glowing consoles, but it was the schematics displayed on the central holoscreen that chilled his blood. "Arya, look," he breathed, pointing to the rotating DNA helix, the segments marked with Vorkarian glyphs. "They're not just experimenting on us. They're making a weapon, a virus tailored to human DNA." Arya's eyes widened in horror as the implications sank in. "If they deploy this, it could wipe us out, the colonies, Earth, everything." Jesse's jaw tightened. "We have to stop it." They sprinted to the main console, Jesse's fingers flying over the alien controls as he attempted to access the weapon's data. Arya watched their back, her rifle at the ready. "Well, what have we here?" A cold, rasping voice cut through the room. Jesse spun to see a tall Vorkarian emerge from a side chamber, his white lab coat splattered with what looked disturbingly like human blood. "Dr. Zorgax, I presume?" Jesse said, his hand inching towards his holstered sidearm. The Vulcarian smiled, a chilling display of needle-like teeth. Perceptive for a human. I've been studying you, you know. You and your kind's irritating ability to resist, to fight back long after you should rightfully be crushed. Zorgax began to circle them, his reptilian eyes glinting. But I've found your weakness, a simple chemical cocktail to negate your enhancements. In a blur of motion, the Vulcarian jabbed a syringe into his own neck, depressing the plunger. His scales rippled, muscles bulging beneath his coat. "Arya, the data!" Jesse yelled, drawing his sidearm and firing at Zorgax. The Vulcarian moved with terrifying speed, evading the shots and closing the distance. Jesse barely had time to react before Zorgax was on him, a scaly fist slamming into his gut, driving the air from his lungs. He staggered back, bringing his arms up to block the alien's next strike. They traded blows in a brutal dance, Jesse's terror training the only thing keeping him alive against Zorgax's chemically enhanced strength and speed. The Vulcarian seemed to anticipate his every move, countering with devastating precision. A clawed hand slipped past Jesse's guard, the razor-sharp talons raking across his chest, shredding his body armor and drawing blood. Jesse gritted his teeth against the pain, retaliating with a swift kick to Zorgax's knee. Through the haze of pain, Jesse saw Arya at the console, her fingers racing over the controls. She met his gaze for a split second, her eyes conveying a silent message. "Keep him busy." With a roar of defiance, Jesse wrenched his hand free and tackled Zorgax, sending them both crashing to the floor. They grappled, rolling across the blood-slicked tiles, exchanging punishing blows. Zorgax's claws found Jesse's face, gouging deep furrows across his cheek. Jesse howled in agony but refused to let go, his fingers scrabbling for the syringe at the Vulcarian's neck. With a last burst of desperate strength, he ripped the syringe free and plunged it into Zorgax's eye, depressing the plunger to the hilt. The Vulcarian screamed, a sound of pure, unimaginable agony as the overdose of his own serum coursed through his body, his physiology spiraling out of control. Jesse staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. "Arya!" he called, his voice hoarse. "Got it!" she yelled back, ripping a data drive from the console. "Charge is set, we have to move." They ran, half stumbling, half dragging each other through the twisting corridors as the first explosions began to rock the facility. Alarms blared, and Vulcarians shouted. But all Jesse could focus on was the feel of Arya's hand in his, the pounding of their hearts as they raced for the exit. They burst out into the cool night air just as the complex went up in a massive fireball, the shockwave hurling them to the ground. Jesse wrapped himself around Arya, shielding her from the falling debris as the Vulcarian research facility crumbled in on itself, the heart of their vile experiments destroyed in a maelstrom of fire and ash. In the aftermath, as the resistance fighters picked through the rubble and tended to the wounded, Jesse and Arya huddled around a makeshift table, the schematics of the Vulcarian bioweapon glowing on a salvaged holoprojector. Hawkins studied the rotating DNA helix, his face grim. "This is bad. Damn scalebacks were further along than we thought." Jesse nodded, wincing as Arya applied a field dressing to the gashes on his chest. "The data we pulled shows they were close to a test deployment. If they have off-site backups or other facilities, then nowhere is safe, least of all the colonies," Arya finished, her voice tight. "We have to end this once and for all." "Agreed," Hawkins said, his eyes hard. "It's time we took the fight to their doorstep, hit them where they live." The resistance fighters exchanged glances, a mix of fear and determination on their faces. They all knew what that meant, an assault on the Vulcarian homeworld itself. Later, in a moment of stolen quiet, Jesse held Arya close, the two of them leaning against the rusted hull of the rusty bucket. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Jesse pressed a kiss to her forehead. "We make a good team." He nodded, his heart swelling with a fierce mix of love and determination. Together, no matter the cost. The resistance base hummed with activity, as the fighters prepared for their most daring operation yet. Weapons were checked and double-checked, power armor was calibrated, and ships were fueled and armed. The air crackled with a mix of tension and anticipation, everyone acutely aware of the stakes. In the command center, Jesse, Arya, and Hawkins pored over the latest intelligence, mapping out their plan of attack. The Vorkarian homeworld was a fortress, ringed with orbital defenses and patrolled by a vast armada of warships. Infiltrating it would require every ounce of skill, cunning, and luck they possessed. "Our best bet is a stealth approach," Jesse said, pointing to a schematic of a Vorkarian frigate. "We hijack one of their ships, use its IFF codes to slip past the perimeter defenses." Arya nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "Once we're on the surface, we'll need to move fast, strike at their command and control centers, sabotage their communications and power grids." "Sow as much chaos as possible," Hawkins agreed, his scarred face set in grim lines. "Keep them off balance while we hunt down the bioweapon labs and wipe them out." It was a bold plan, audacious in its scope and daunting in its risks. But they all knew there was no alternative. The Vorkarians had to be stopped, no matter the cost. As the planning session broke up, Jesse pulled Arya aside, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to back out." She met his gaze unflinchingly, fire in her eyes. "I'm with you, Jesse, to whatever end." He nodded, his heart swelling with love and pride. Together they strode out to face the gathered resistance fighters, ready to share their audacious plan. With the bioweapon schematics secure, Jesse wasted no time. He ducked into the Rusty Bucket's cockpit and hailed Terra headquarters on a scrambled channel. "Zoe, you copy?" "Loud and clear, Jesse. Tell me you have good news." "Better than good. We've got the bioweapon plans, transmitting now." His fingers flew over the console, uploading the encrypted data. "Incredible work, Jesse. This is the break we've been waiting for." Zoe's voice crackled with excitement. "With these schematics, we can develop a countermeasure, maybe even a cure." Jesse leaned forward, his voice urgent. "There's more. We need to end this war, Zoe, and I've got a plan, but it's going to require a strike team hitting the Vorkarian homeworld hard and fast." There was a pause, then Zoe's voice returned, steel in her tone. "Consider it done. I'll assemble our best agents immediately. What's your play?" "Distraction and diversion," Jesse replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "We'll keep the scalebacks busy on Xanthus Prime, hit 'em where it hurts. Draw their focus while your team slips in the back door." "Gutsy, I like it." Zoe's approval was clear. "Give 'em hell, Jesse. We'll be in touch." As the channel closed, Jesse turned to find Arya watching him, a fierce pride shining in her eyes. "You heard the lady," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's give 'em hell." Over the next days and weeks, Jesse and the Resistance launched a blistering campaign of guerrilla strikes against Vorkarian military targets across Xanthus Prime. Supply depots erupted in flames, communications arrays crashed offline, and troop transports found themselves besieged by human fighters wielding advanced weaponry. At the tip of the spear was the Rusty Bucket, Jesse at the controls as he wove through asteroid fields and dived through canyons, always one step ahead of the pursuing Vorkarian fighters. His unorthodox tactics and seemingly reckless maneuvers left the aliens baffled and enraged. "He flies like a drunk krillnik," one Vorkarian commander snarled, as the Rusty Bucket once again slipped through his grasp, leaving a trail of sparking wreckage in its wake. But there was nothing drunken about Jesse's flying. Each daring twist, each heart-stopping dive, was carefully calculated to exploit the weaknesses of the Vorkarian ships, to draw them into traps and minefields laid by the Resistance. And with each successful raid, each daring escape, the legend of Jesse Walker grew, whispered in awe by the human colonists, and spat with increasing frustration by the Vorkarian occupiers. It was during one such raid, as Jesse threaded the Rusty Bucket through the razor-sharp peaks of the Xanthus spires, that Arya picked up an intriguing transmission on the comms. "Jesse, listen to this." She boosted the signal, filling the cockpit with the sibilant hisses of the Vorkarian tongue. Jesse frowned, his grasp of the language still rudimentary. What are they saying? Arya listened intently, her eyes widening. It's about the bioweapon. They're saying a high-level delegation is coming to oversee the final stages, led by the Supreme Commander himself. Jesse's grip tightened on the controls, his mind racing. The Supreme Commander, here on Xanthus Prime, the head of the Serpent itself. An idea began to form, audacious and dangerous. If they could capture the Supreme Commander, use him as a bargaining chip. He turned to Arya, excitement thrumming in his veins. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? She met his gaze, a slow, fierce grin spreading across her face. Let's do it. The plan was swiftly formed and set in motion. The Resistance would stage a series of diversionary attacks, drawing the bulk of the Vorkarian forces away from the Supreme Commander's landing site. Meanwhile, Jesse and Arya would lead a hand-picked team in a lightning strike on the delegation itself. The Rusty Bucket screamed through the atmosphere, flanked by a squadron of Resistance fighters in power armor. Below, the arid plains of the Xanthus Badlands stretched to the horizon, broken only by the gleaming spires of the Vorkarian compound. As they approached the landing pad, the air around them erupted with anti-aircraft fire, energy bolts stitching the sky. Jesse jinked and wove, the Rusty Bucket shuddering under the onslaught. Arya, fire suppression, now! He yelled over the screaming alarms. She triggered the ship's electromagnetic pulse cannon, sending out a cascading wave that shorted out the Vorkarian guns. A cheer went up from the Resistance fighters as they dove in, strafing the compound with blasts from their pulse rifles. The Vorkarian guards scattered, thrown into disarray by the suddenness of the attack. Jesse brought the Rusty Bucket down hard, skidding across the landing pad in a shower of sparks. He was out of his seat in an instant, pulse pistol in hand. Go, go, go! They charged down the ramp, Arya at his side, the Resistance fighters fanning out behind them. The Vorkarian delegation had just emerged from their shuttle, a phalanx of elite guards surrounding a tall, regally dressed figure. The Supreme Commander. Pulse fire crackled back and forth as the two forces clashed. Jesse and Arya fought their way forward, moving in perfect sync, covering each other as they advanced. A Vorkarian guard loomed up before Jesse, plasma sword hissing. Jesse dodged the slash and fired point blank, the pulse blast taking the guard in the throat. He leapt over the falling body, eyes locked on the Supreme Commander. The Vorkarian leader was retreating back into the shuttle, his guards closing ranks. Jesse knew he only had moments. He charged forward, vaulting over a barricade and rolling under a hail of pulse fire. He came up running, Arya laying down covering fire as he sprinted for the shuttle ramp. A guard reared up before him, rifle leveled. Jesse dropped into a slide, the shots passing harmlessly overhead. He slammed into the guard's legs, sending him tumbling. A swift kick to the head put the Vorkarian down for good. Jesse leapt to his feet, bounding up the ramp. The Supreme Commander whirled to face him, eyes widening in shock and fear. Jesse raised his pistol, a cold smile on his face. Surrender, Commander, you're coming with me. The Supreme Commander hissed in rage, his hand darting for his own weapon. Jesse fired, the pulse blast striking the Vorkarian in the chest, but instead of burning a hole, the energy diffused across a shimmering force field. Jesse cursed, realizing the Supreme Commander's personal shields were military grade. The Vorkarian smiled cruelly, drawing his plasma pistol. Fool, Primitive! Did you think it would be so easy? Arya's warning shout rang out, and Jesse dove to the side as a blast of searing plasma passed through the space he'd just occupied. He rolled to his feet, mind racing. The Supreme Commander stalked forward, plasma pistol leveled. I will enjoy watching you die, human. Jesse's hand slipped to his belt, fingers closing around a small cylindrical object. The neural disruptor, a terror weapon designed to short out the nervous systems of organic targets. It had never been tested on a Vorkarian before, but it was now or never. He thumbed the activation stud and lunged forward, ducking under the Supreme Commander's next shot. He slammed the disruptor against the Vorkarian's chest, directly over his primary nerve cluster. The Supreme Commander convulsed as arcs of electricity played over his body, his shields flickering and dying. He slumped to the deck, unconscious. Jesse stood over him, breathing hard. He looked up to see Arya rushing into the shuttle, her face a mix of relief and awe. "You did it," she breathed. Jesse nodded, holstering his pistol. "Let's get him out of here." They dragged the Supreme Commander down the ramp, the Resistance fighters letting out a ragged cheer at the sight. Jesse activated his comms. "All units, this is Walker. We have the package. Fall back to the rendezvous point." As the rusty bucket lifted off, the Supreme Commander secure in its hold, Jesse allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but he knew this was only the beginning. The war had just taken a new turn, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Back at the Resistance base, Jesse stood before the assembled fighters, the Supreme Commander bound and kneeling at his feet. Arya stood at his side, the bioweapon schematics in hand. Jesse activated the base's long-range transmitter, broadcasting on all Vorkarian frequencies. "Attention, Vorkarian fleet. This is Jesse Walker of the Xanthus Prime Resistance. We have your Supreme Commander." He paused, letting that sink in. "Here are our demands. An immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of all Vorkarian forces from human space, the surrender of all bioweapon research and materials, and the recognition of humanity's right to self-determination." He glanced down at the Supreme Commander, who glared back defiantly. "Failure to comply will result in the execution of your leader and the destruction of all bioweapon data." To punctuate his point, Arya held up the schematics and, with a flick of her wrist, sent them fluttering into a nearby incinerator. The Supreme Commander let out a hiss of rage and dismay. There was a long, tense silence. Then the comms crackled to life. "This is Fleet Commander Vraxis. We accept your terms, human." A ripple of shock and disbelief passed through the gathered Resistance fighters. They had done it. They had brought the mighty Vorkarian Empire to its knees. But even as the first cheers began to ring out, Jesse felt a heaviness in his heart. He knew this was not the end, but merely the beginning of a long and difficult road. The Vorkarians would not forget this humiliation easily. There would be hardliners, warmongers, those who would seek revenge at any cost. The fight for true peace, for understanding between their species, would be the work of generations. But as he looked out over the faces of his comrades, human and Xanthian alike, all united in this moment of triumph, Jesse felt a flicker of hope. They had shown what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. They had shown the indomitable will, the unbreakable spirit, that had carried their species to the stars and beyond. And he knew, come what may, they would face the future together. The galaxy celebrated as news of the Vorkarian surrender spread like wildfire. On every human colony, in every settlement and outpost, people took to the streets in joyous celebration. Cheers rang out, tears flowed freely, and strangers embraced as the weight of the war's end sank in. Amidst the jubilation, two names were on everyone's lips: Jesse Walker and Arya Voss, the heroes of the Resistance. Their daring exploits and unwavering courage in the face of impossible odds had become the stuff of legend. So it was no surprise when the call came from Earth, an invitation from the highest echelons of Terra leadership. Jesse and Arya were to be honored for their service, their bravery, their sacrifice. The journey to Earth was a blur of hyperspace jumps and media interviews, the rusty bucket escorted by a squadron of Terra's finest ships. Jesse and Arya, unaccustomed to the limelight, found themselves thrust into the role of celebrities, their faces plastered across every news feed in the galaxy. But as they stepped off the rusty bucket's ramp onto the hallowed grounds of Terra headquarters, the illusion of triumph shattered. A phalanx of armed guards surrounded Jesse, weapons trained on his chest. "Jesse Walker, you are under arrest for treason and collaborating with the enemy," a stern-faced officer declared, snapping restraints around Jesse's wrists. Harrier lunged forward, fury and confusion etched on her face. What the hell is this? There must be some mistake. The officer turned to her, his expression cold. There's no mistake, ma'am. We have evidence linking Agent Walker to the development of the Vorkarian bioweapon. He's been working with them all along. Carrier's world spun, the ground seeming to tilt beneath her feet. It couldn't be true, it just couldn't. Not Jesse, not the man she'd fought beside, bled beside, loved with every fibre of her being. But Jesse could only shake his head, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief as the guards hauled him away. Arya, I swear I would never... His words were cut off as the guards dragged him inside, the headquarters doors slamming shut with a resounding clang. Harrier tried to follow, to demand answers, but was blocked at every turn. Terror officials stonewalled her, citing classified information and ongoing investigations. No, she could not see Jesse. No, she could not review the evidence. No, there would be no further comment at this time. Frustrated and desperate, Arya retreated to her assigned quarters, her mind reeling. The accusations against Jesse made no sense. She knew him, trusted him with her life. There had to be more to this. Pacing the room like a caged animal, Arya activated her comlink, reaching out to the only people she could trust, Mick and Hawkins. They had returned to their lives after the war, but she knew they would want to know about this. As their shocked and disbelieving faces flickered to life on the comlink's display, Arya laid out the situation, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. They're saying Jesse's a traitor, that he worked with the Vorkarians on the bioweapon. It's bullshit and I'm going to prove it, but I need your help. Mick's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. Damn straight it's bullshit. Jess is no traitor. We'll be there as soon as we can, Arya. We'll get to the bottom of this. Hawkins nodded grimly. Whoever's behind this, they picked the wrong people to mess with. Hang tight, we're on our way. As the call ended, Arya felt a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. She wasn't alone in this fight, and come hell or high water, she would clear Jesse's name and uncover the truth. But even as she began to plan her next move, Arya couldn't shake the sense of unease crawling up her spine. This was more than just a frame job, more than just a personal vendetta. There was something darker at work here, a web of lies and deceit that stretched far beyond Terra's halls. And at the center of it all, she feared, was a truth that could shatter everything they'd fought for. In a Terra detention cell deep beneath the headquarters, Jesse sat on a hard metal bench, his head in his hands. The shock of the arrest had given way to a cold, simmering anger. He knew he was innocent, knew that he had never betrayed his oath or his species, but the evidence the guards had shown him, it was damning. Communications logs, financial records, even video footage that seemed to show him colluding with Vorkarian agents. The cell door hissed open, and Jesse looked up to see a tall, severe-looking man enter. His uniform was crisp and unadorned, but the bars on his collar marked him as a high-ranking Terra official. "Agent Walker," the man said, his voice cold and clipped. "I'm Director Kale. I have some questions for you." Jesse met Kale's gaze unflinchingly, his jaw set. "I have some questions for you too, Director. Like, why the hell am I being accused of treason?" Kale's lip curled in a sneer. "You can drop the act, Walker. We have all the proof we need of your guilt. The only question is, how deep does your betrayal go? Who else was involved?" "There is no betrayal," Jesse spat, rising to his feet. "I am loyal to Terra, to humanity. I always have been." Kale chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. "Loyal? Is that what you call conspiring with the enemy? Helping them develop a weapon to exterminate your own kind?" He leaned in close, his breath hot on Jesse's face. "You disgust me, Walker. You had everything, skill, talent, respect. You could have been a legend. Instead, you'll be remembered as the worst traitor in human history." Jesse's hands clenched into fists, the urge to strike Kale almost overwhelming. But he forced himself to stay still, to meet the director's gaze with unwavering defiance. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low and fierce, "and I'll prove it. I don't know what game you're playing, Kale, but I promise you this. The truth will come out. And when it does, It's you who'll be facing justice." For a moment something flickered in Cale's eyes, a hint of unease quickly masked. Then his face hardened, his smile turning vicious. "Big words, Walker, but in here the truth is what I say it is, and no one is coming to save you, not your friends, not your lover, no one. You're mine now." With that, Cale turned on his heel and strode out, the cell door slamming shut behind him. Jesse sank back onto the bench, his heart pounding. Cale's words echoed in his mind, taunting him. Could it be true? Could he really be so thoroughly abandoned, so completely alone? No, he refused to believe it. Arya was out there, and she would never stop fighting for him. Mick, Hawkins, Zoe, they knew him, believed in him. They would find a way to clear his name. He just had to hold on, to endure whatever trials lay ahead. Because one way or another the truth would out, and when it did, those who had sought to destroy him would face a reckoning like none they had ever known. Even if it killed him, Jesse Walker would have justice. For himself, for Arya, for all of humanity. That was a promise. Arya's fingers flew across the console, her eyes scanning the data scrolling across the screen. She'd retreated to the rusty bucket, using the ship's encrypted systems to access Terra's network. It was a risk, but one she had to take. She had to find the truth about the accusations against Jesse, had to uncover who was really behind this plot, and the only way to do that was to dig, to follow the trail of evidence wherever it led. It was slow going, every layer of encryption and security a new challenge to overcome, but Arya was nothing if not persistent. She'd honed her skills in the Resistance, learning to slice through Vorkarian systems like a hot knife through butter. Terra's network was a different beast, but the principles were the same. Find the weak points, exploit the gaps, and never ever give up. Hours turned into days as she worked, barely stopping to eat or sleep. Mick and Hawkins joined her, their own expertise invaluable. Together they combed through terabytes of data, chasing down every lead, every inconsistency. And slowly, painstakingly, a picture began to emerge. The evidence against Jesse was too perfect, too neat. It had been carefully constructed, expertly planted to paint him as a traitor. But there were cracks in the facade, tiny discrepancies that didn't add up. A timestamp here, a data signature there, breadcrumbs leading to a larger truth. Arya followed those crumbs, burrowing deeper and deeper into the system, and what she found made her blood run cold. Encrypted communications, hidden financial transactions, all pointing to a single source, Director Cale. The man who had arrested Jesse, who had accused him of treason, was himself the traitor. The logs painted a damning picture. Cale had been in contact with Vorkarian hardliners for months, working to undermine the peace, to reignite the war. The bioweapon, Jesse's arrest. It was all part of his plan, a twisted bid for power and control. Arya sat back, her heart pounding. She had the truth now, the proof of Jesse's innocence, but Cale was untouchable, protected by his position and his allies. To bring him down, they would need more than just data. They would need to catch him in the act, to expose his treachery in a way that no one could deny, and to do that they would have to take a risk greater than any they had faced before. Arya looked to Mick and Hawkins, saw the same determination burning in their eyes. They nodded, unspoken agreement passing between them. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, they would see justice done. For Jesse, for the fallen, for the future they had fought so hard to build. Failure was not an option. Director Cale had picked the wrong enemies. And he was about to learn the true meaning of consequence. With the conspiracy laid bare, and the traitors brought to justice, Jesse and Arya found themselves once again in the spotlight, lauded as saviors of humanity. In a grand ceremony at Terra headquarters, they were presented with the highest honors the agency could bestow, their names etched into the annals of history. But even as the applause echoed through the Great Hall, Jesse and Arya exchanged a knowing glance. Their work was far from over. The Vorkarian extremists and their human collaborators had been dealt a blow, but they were far from defeated. Like cockroaches scurrying from the light, They had retreated into the shadows, no doubt already plotting their next move. The Terra leadership, recognizing the unique skills and experience of their two-star agents, wasted no time in presenting them with a new mission. "We need you to lead a special task force," Admiral Zhao explained, her holographic image flickering above the briefing table. "Your objective will be to hunt down these remaining threats, wherever they may hide." Jesse leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and concern. "We'll need resources, Admiral, the best tech, the best people. This won't be easy." Arya nodded in agreement. "And we'll need autonomy, the ability to operate outside the normal chain of command. These enemies are clever. They'll be watching for any sign of official Terra involvement." Admiral Zhao smiled tightly. "You'll have what you need. We're giving you carte blanche. The only directive is results." Jesse and Arya glanced at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew what this mission would mean. Months, perhaps years, spent apart as they chased down leads across the vast expanse of the galaxy. Time stolen from the life they had hoped to build together. But they also knew there was no choice. They were the best hope humanity had. The farewell was bittersweet, a tangle of desperate kisses and whispered promises in the shadow of the rusty bucket's hulking form. "I'll find you," Arya breathed, her forehead pressed to Jesse's. "No matter how long it takes, I'll find you." Jesse held her tight, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "I'll be waiting, and when this is over, when the galaxy is safe, we'll have all the time in the world." As the ships lifted off, arcing in opposite directions into the star-strewn sky, Jesse couldn't shake a deep sense of unease. His instincts, honed by years of covert ops, whispered that this conspiracy ran far deeper than anyone suspected. Even now, after all they had uncovered, he felt like they had barely scratched the surface. He thought of Kale, of the web of deceit that had nearly ensnared them all. If a man that high up in Terra could be turned, who else might be compromised? Who could be trusted in a galaxy where betrayal lurked around every corner? Jesse shook his head, trying to clear the doubts. He had a job to do, a mission to complete. Everything else would have to wait. The months slipped by, turning into years. Jesse followed the trail of the Vorkarian extremists from one end of the galaxy to the other, always seeming to be just a step behind. He infiltrated their secret bases, disrupted their operations, but the masterminds remained elusive. The loneliness was a constant companion, broken only by the occasional burst of static-filled comm chatter with Arya. They snatched moments where they could, sharing brief glimpses into their separate hunts. But the distance, both physical and emotional, grew with each passing day. Jesse threw himself into the work, letting the mission consume him. He told himself it was better this way, that attachments were a liability in his line of work. But in the quiet moments, the moments between the firefights and the chases, the moments when the vast emptiness of space pressed in from all sides, he couldn't escape the truth. He missed her, more than he had ever missed anything in his life. But the work continued. The hunt went on. Until one day a break, a trusted Terra contact reaching out with vital intel on the extremists' next move, a chance finally to end this. The meeting was set for a remote outpost, a place Jesse had been 100 times before, but as he made his approach, a familiar tingle ran down his spine. Something wasn't right. He docked the rusty bucket a good distance from the outpost, opting to jet over in a short-range shuttle. As he stepped into the airlock, he hesitated, then doubled back. From a hidden compartment, he pulled his old Terra-issue plasma rifle, the one he hadn't used since that last fateful mission with Arya. Better safe than sorry. The outpost was quiet, deserted. Jesse moved through the corridors with practiced stealth, the rifle held at the ready. He reached the designated meeting room and paused, listening. He took a deep breath, then kicked the door open, rifle up and scanning. And there, standing in the center of the room, a smile on his reptilian face, was his contact. No, not his contact, a Vorkarian clad in the stolen uniform of a Terra operative. "Hello, Agent Walker," the Vorkarian said, his voice a sibilant hiss. "We've been expecting you." Jesse's finger tightened on the trigger, but too late. A searing pain erupted in his back as a plasma bolt tore through him from behind. He staggered, spinning, firing blindly. The Vorkarian infiltrator lunged, a wicked-looking blade glinting in his hand. Jesse parried, the rifle clattering away, lost in the struggle. They crashed to the ground, a tangle of limbs and desperate blows. The Vorkarian was strong, fast, but Jesse had desperation on his side. With a final, wrenching effort, he drove his knee into the alien's groin, then smashed his fist into his throat. The Vorkarian went limp, his eyes rolling back in his head. Jesse rolled off him, gasping, his hand pressed to the wound in his back. He could feel the blood, hot and sticky, pulsing between his fingers. With a grunt of effort, he dragged himself across the floor, leaving a smear of crimson in his wake. He reached the comm terminal, fumbled for the controls. "Arya," he gasped, his vision blurring. "Arya, it's a trap. They're everywhere. You have to warn—" But the words wouldn't come. The room was spinning, going dark at the edges. With a final desperate effort, Jesse stabbed at the send button, praying the message would get through. Then he slumped back, his eyes fluttering closed. As the blackness claimed him, one final thought drifted through his fading mind. Arya. He had to hold on. For her, for the promise of the life they would never have. A decade later, a different world. A galaxy forever changed by the revelations of the conspiracy, by the scars of the war that followed. Humans and Vorkarians, once bitter enemies, now locked in an uneasy truce, a cold war fought in the shadows. Arya stood on the bridge of her ship, staring out at the stars. The years had changed her, hardened her. The eager young resistance fighter was gone, replaced by a battle-weary veteran, a woman haunted by the ghosts of her past. A chime from the comm console stirred her from her thoughts. She crossed to it, tapped a key. A message scrolled across the screen, anonymous, untraceable. Just a set of coordinates and a single word. Endgame. Arya's breath caught in her throat. After all these years, could it be? Some sign, some clue to Jesse's fate. She didn't hesitate. Plugging the coordinates into her nav computer, she laid in a course. As the stars stretched into the familiar lines of hyperspace, Arya felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. But even as the hope bloomed, a cold dread crept up her spine. Endgame, the final move in a long and deadly game. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.